I think that was worth coming back from the break for. Those are three excellent ideas. Thank you to Eva and thank you to our finalists. That really is going to be interesting to see which one comes out on top with the group here. Again, business development is our theme for today. So innovation is important, but there's also lots of opportunities, and we want to explore those. And so I'm going to ask Nick Kareen to come back to the stage and join with a panel of experts to discuss about what might be on the future. So Nick.
Working? You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, you're stuck with, thanks, John. Yes, you're stuck with me and three others to talk about opportunities in ground operations for the next hour. And we're very lucky to have those who we do have with us because they actually are experts in their field and cover off trade association, but also a vast amount of ground operations experience, relevant day of right now, ground operations executive, and a ground operations safety expert. I don't know, David, are you considered a safety expert? Would you say that out loud? So before we get started, I'd like to ask the gentleman to come up and join me. We have Steve Allen, who is on the senior leadership team at Donata. We have David Anderson, who is head of operations safety, risk compliance for British Airways, and Mr. John Conway, Director General for ASA. So, welcome, gentlemen.
Steve, you're there.
Oh, we got. No, it's based on height, not age.
You're there. No, David, you're here, and I'm here. We did it late.
There's a plan.
Now, okay. Now you wonder why we can't get airplanes out on time. So I would just like to start it off by thanking you, gentlemen, for taking the time to share your views with the group here in terms of where we see opportunities on the ground operations side as we move forward, or as John, you may say, challenges that would lead to opportunities. You saw this morning in the presentation, if I didn't lull you to sleep, that from a global perspective, our industry is poised for growth. That growth comes with significant challenges in terms of infrastructure and how are we going to be able to maintain that growth. We talked a little bit about, and you've heard the themes of this particular conference when we talk about harmonization of standards across the globe, whether that's IGOM, whether that's ISEGO, talking about innovation, which we just saw three great presentations in terms of what opportunities out there. I often joke that the 1970s call and they want their processes back when it comes to ground operations. So in many respects, that's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek. We have made progress, but many of us who have worked the ramp in their previous lives know that within probably a day or two, you could be back out and being productive on a ramp, which probably says a lot about the opportunity for advancement in that particular area. And we've done some things. We've made some progress from the last this is my third IGHC, and I think from where we were in terms of establishing a ground operations group, I think we've come a long way there. We just had the most recent one in Montreal just over a month ago, and the experts in the room, we have the right people. Now it's about executing on our initiatives, and all three guys here are sitting on that group, so I'm sure they'll be able to expand on that. So without further ado, I think I'd like to get into a few questions. I'll remind everybody that if you have something, put it in the app. If you have a question, we'll get to it. As we move along, be patient because I guess I've been told that the internet is a little bit spotty in this room. So I will start with no particular order, and you guys can volunteer to see who wants to answer this question first. And if you want to jump on it and elaborate it, by all means. But before we get into that, you gentlemen want to actually expand on what you do, or do we just get into the questions?
We'll just get into the questions, shall we?
Okay, all right, let's just do that then. So the first question is, where do you see the future opportunities in ground ops from a business, operational, and infrastructure point of view? And I think all of you guys probably should weigh in on that, but does anyone want to tackle that one first?
Okay, go ahead. Well, I guess what you laid out this morning was quite interesting in terms of where the growth's going to happen going forwards. The sort of continuing trajectory going forwards is going to be a challenge because the airport infrastructure isn't there to be able to support that. And I think the way I see it is there's three types of worlds that we're going to move into. We've got the new world, most of the growth is happening in emerging countries. where the infrastructure isn't great, needs a lot of development, and there are a lot of risks in terms of A, doing business, and B, the safety of operations. I think the second world is the world of the legacy airports where they're really creaking at the seams, they're full, we're having to operate with major constraints, and it's going to take quite a lot of investment to be able to upgrade that infrastructure. And I guess the third one is the sort of the ones where there is significant investment going on, to develop the airports and to develop the industry, and there's money being spent. And for me, that's where we need to be involved as an industry in how that's designed, and we need to be involved, both airlines, airports, and ground handlers, in making sure that we create optimized processes when we've got the chance. You only get a once-in-a-decade opportunity to build an airport, so we really need to be involved together.
So just to add to that,
Being in Heathrow and the giant debate.
yeah, no, absolutely, and I think there are opportunities for us to be more efficient and to use the assets we've got better. I think when you look at some of the work we're trying to do in the ground ops group around trying to get some standardization into our procedures, we tried, goodness me, for it feels like years and years to get an IGOM, so that we all operate the same way. Everybody's 747s or 777s really do the same thing on the ground, yet we all want to handle them slightly differently. So certainly the standardization piece for me is a key piece if we want to drive some future efficiencies. But I think beside that is automation. I think the previous three presentations on the innovation section was superb. I think there are real opportunities as we go forward, whether that be driverless vehicles, auto-docking jetties, whatever it may be. There's huge scope out there for us, and I think we've just got to grasp it as an industry and move forward. And I think that way we can drive efficiency, we can make the world a safer place, and we all end up with a better operation at the end of it. So there is the opportunity for growth, but we have to think carefully how we do it.
What, John? Before you expand on that, why do you think it takes so long to get the industry to embrace something as simple as a ground operations manual?
It's a $1 million question, isn't it?
Well,
Because everybody in this room would agree that I'm pretty sure, with a show of hands, everyone in this room that's close to a ground operation would agree that a common standard would make sense.
And I guess, Nick, from an airline that is a legacy carrier, we have developed our procedures over, not just over years, almost over generations, based on incidents that we've had and based on what we think is best practice for the environment we work within and the cultures we've got. And they've grown up and been developed as we've been a self-handling organization, and then they change as we move into being more supplier-led. And I suspect every legacy carrier is in a similar position, and then we've got a lot of the no-frills carriers coming into the same space. And we're all coming at different times and different points. It is entirely logical we should align, to my mind. But I think because we're all at different stages in the journey, it's quite difficult. And everybody thinks what they do is best, which isn't necessarily the case. And I think we've all got to learn to compromise. And does it really matter if it's 4 chocks or 6 chocks? Who cares? We just want to chalk the aircraft. Let's just make the decision and move on to the more important discussions we've got to have.
John?
Well, our position on IGOM is, I hope, frighteningly clear. An aircraft should be turned around based on aircraft type, not on airline. And the upsides of that are, in my view, and in our industry's view, I think, significant. Complexity reduction, operational safety improvements, keep it simple, KISS, we all know about KISS and all those sorts of things. So for me, it's a no-brainer, and that's, I think David and I are on the same IATA group, as you well know, and we're both aligned from our sector's perspective, and certainly from a lot of carriers' perspective. And we put in place a program which hopefully will improve adoption. I, like you, share concerns about the time it takes to get things done, and that probably is an observation within the ground ops sort of general industry. Just going back to the original question, if I may, the presentation and the forecast, the IATA forecast for passenger growth, I actually find quite scary. And Steve has talked about infrastructure constraints, and we've chatted before the panel about infrastructure constraints. And that does concern me. However, I was on the jury that did the innovation shortlisting. And I have to say, I think Eva mentioned there were 14 submissions. All of them were absolutely excellent. The quality was excellent, and it was very, very difficult to come up with a short list of 3, I have to say. So on one hand, I'm encouraged by the innovation side. I do have concerns about where we're going to process 8 billion passengers, I think it is, by 2036, without significant changes in process improvements, dare I say, airport infrastructure. But I think our industry is fundamentally changing, and that may be a slightly separate topic, but stuff above wing particularly now is very different. When I traveled as a child with my parents, very different an airport experience in terms of self-service, web check, all the stuff that you know. I think the below wing stuff, the next generation, this is where the big change is going to be happening, and we're probably going to talk about technology opportunities later on. So I think a big challenge to process 8 billion people. Even the number does my head in. But I don't think it's beyond the realms of man or ground handler, or woman or ground handler, indeed.
Excellent.
That's thrown you, hasn't it? That was so clever. You just dumbstruck.
I'm lost. I forgot where I was.
While you're shuffling, just picking up on that point, as we move into sort of digital world, we have to standardize and start sharing and connecting things together. That's what the digital world is like. And if everybody operates in their silos, then you're not going to actually connect things together to make it better for a customer experience, a baggage experience, a cargo experience. So, it really actually drives standardization, this sort of digital world. A lot of it is about, the naming conventions of various processes, that if you're going to pass them between the ground handler, the airport, the airline, you all need to agree how that information is going to flow. And if we can really go down that path of actually trying to standardize, then we'll make that whole digitization much, much easier. And that's the driver for me, is that, the IGOM's great, but actually to be able to embrace the digital world, we have to standardize. Otherwise, we're just going to, it just won't connect.
Well, that's what ACDM is all about.
ACDM's a great example of that, yeah.
It's not even just our industry, is it? Your colleague at the ICAO, I was in a ICAO meeting recently, back end, talking about runway incursions and excursions. And I had no idea. I'm not a flight ops person, but he was saying he flies to 100, or your company flies to 125 places. Each one has got a slightly different taxiway or taxi instruction taxonomy. And he said it's frightening. And then you look at, going back to my point about the growth, if we don't get this right, we don't sort of standardize and harmonize, embrace digital solutions to everything, it could get messy. Not Lionel Messi.
Okay, I don't know where this popped into my head, but maybe I didn't get enough sleep last night. But do you think we're going to continue to do things the way we do them today?
I'll just dive in. I think above wing is changing fundamentally. We talked recently at a meeting about holographic gate agents, self-boarding. So biometrics, self-boarding, no gate agent. Just maybe somebody, a roaming agent to deal with some, non-standard issues. And I see quite a lot of change in the last 10 years about what happens above wing. I think the below wing area is the one which is lagging. And you talked about, learning to drive a lower deck loader 25 years ago. Probably you do a differences course in a day, and you'd probably be back on as good as you ever were.
Most airlines are still using that same loader, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is true. So I would suggest the above wing stuff, and as ground handling companies, I think we acknowledge and have to embrace that and work with our customer airlines, because they want to provide different solutions to their customers. Our job as the outsource agent is to work with them and come up with and deliver those solutions. So that's quite cool, but it just means we have to think differently about what we do. And as I said, above wing, I see more and more changes, be it even passenger screening, transfer passenger screening, baggage, your new resolutions about tracking bag from A to Z and all those good things. Below wing, as we know, seems to be a little bit more difficult. But again, we can talk later about technology there and other issues there. But I personally, above wing, I've checked in on so many flights and never seen an agent, recently.
Yeah.
But I think the below wing is coming. I think there's enough, and if you were to walk around the hall outside, I think there's enough innovation taking place for us to be excited about the future, to say that there is, the ideas are out there, and I guess it's taking those ideas from a concept into how do we get them to be the standard across the industry. You could jot down in a bit of paper all the opportunities, and I guess most of the manufacturers out there have probably done that and are thinking, how do they develop a high loader that will automatically engage bags direct to a stand, whatever it may be. I think there's probably 5 or 6 things that would be real game changers for us. And if we can get standardization on them, so that when British Airways flies into Dubai, we know we've got the same processes and procedures. So let's not reinvent a myriad of different options. Let's try and get the standardization in so that when we fly around the world, we can get the same processes and efficiencies.
I'd like to see more innovation from the GSE side. It does feel like we're still operating the same equipment as we were 20 years ago. And with autonomous coming, with the ability to have sensors on, it's coming, but it's coming slowly. And I think if we're not careful, the traditional GSE builders are going to get taken over by the autonomous vehicle creators. These guys who are building them for supermarkets and for towns are going to come in and say, why don't we do it for the airport as well? And that will just bypass. So, I'd like to see them working together to really press on with this autonomous vehicle. It will save money, it will be much safer, but it's got its challenges, there's no doubt. Yeah.
Which is interesting, go back to John's point about the 8 billion customers. That's an awful lot of bags. That's an awful lot of additional resource you need around the airport, on the tarmac. And that resource, I think, as we know today, is quite difficult to attract in some markets. So Steve, you're right. We need to find that way. How do we get the automation so you haven't got the human? We're not reliant on companies having 80, 90, 100% turnover every year and spending time recruiting. Let's take the human out and let's use the efficiencies that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that in mind, what are I mean, you guys are on the ground, are familiar obviously with the ground operations group, I would hope by now. What are the priorities of the GOG to address the future? If you were to name a few, what are they?
He's the chairman.
He's the chairman, so we're going to give it to him.
Yeah, thank you.
Over to you, David.
That's what I prepared earlier.
From a starting point, we're starting at the basics. So, adoption of the IGOM. So I think we made some good progress, I believe, when we actually met in Doha about 6 months ago, and we agreed on some dates for airlines and ground handlers to adopt the IGOM. Some debates around whether you can have a variation to the IGOM, and I think the decision was yes, you can. Airlines can have a variation. The agreement was that ground handlers would just adopt the IGOM directly, but it's a starting point to get us to some standardization. So the intent is, hopefully by this time next year, we will have 10 or 15 safety critical items that all the airlines and all the GSPs are adopting. From an airline point of view, the intent is that we will be measured on our compliance through IOSA, and hopefully the GSPs through ISAGO. So we start to get to a position where we've got, as I say, 10 or 15 items that we're all doing the same way. Then hopefully we can prove that works and move it forward. But equally within the ground ops group, some of the other priorities we've got are, I think we've had 4 or 5 groups. So, and apologies for people who don't understand where the ground ops group sits within IATA. So we've got 5 groups that feed into the ground ops group. So we've got the AXA group, who manage the standard ground handling agreement. We've got the load control group. We've got the airport safety group. We've got the IGOM group, and we have got, I'm missing one now. GSE group, thank you. And I think previously there's been 5 groups working incredibly hard, but I don't think they've had the direction they need. So what we're trying to do is pull them together so that we're all pointing in the same direction. And that direction is standardization. Absolutely, that's the key word for everything. Let's get standardization and then innovation and automation. So Steve chaired a session when we met in Montreal on the ramp of the future. Mm-hmm. What do we think a dark ramp might look like? A ramp without human beings. Because it may not happen in our working lifetime, but certainly the next generation, and let's make sure that what we present to them is workable, and we put the right foundation blocks in now.
John?
Well, not really a lot to add. I know Steve's nodding sagely. I think Steve has got a challenge, hasn't he? You have to do a peopleless turnaround for the Expo 2020?
We're trying to create an autonomous turnaround, so no people involved in turning around.
Except
I've
the
got
pilot.
images of sort of high loaders crashing into wings and things going rogue down the runway and all this sort of stuff. So we'll do it on a piece of tarmac.
There's
that's
no,
not
there's no
risk-
bag.
There's
Just
no
don't put any
risk.
bags on that flight.
No passengers or bags on
yeah,
the flight.
that'll work.
But I think that's where you've got to start. You've got to start by creating these challenges, engaging with the people like we saw on the innovation side here. There's some bright people out here. The people who are the 20-year veterans in ground operations are not going to come up with some of these solutions. It's going to be the people who come from other industries and other backgrounds that are going to come up with them. And setting them that sort of challenge, you'll be amazed how quickly they can reach it. I think it will be 10, 15 years away before we have truly autonomous turnaround, because obviously it's a very high-risk business, and we know what's happened with Uber in the States and where there's been they've sort of had a setback and had to sort of regroup. But it's got to come, and if we don't start somewhere, that's we'll miss the opportunity. So I'm really keen on that. I think you mentioned ACDM. Some of the innovation ideas.
So does it HCDM, for those that we're assuming everybody knows what that is?
Yeah, so airport collaborative decision making. So this is where everybody at the airport shares all the data that they've got to make sure that they can turn around aircraft safely and on time and cope with any disruption. So it normally happens in an airport control center, where you get the ground handlers, the air traffic control, the airport themselves and the airlines all talking together and sharing data. And believe me, that's quite hard to get them to share data. They're quite nervous about it. But with ACDM, we've got a future where basically every passenger, every bag, every vehicle, every aircraft can be tracked independently. And so every single sort of moving part will know exactly where it is. And I think some of the innovation stuff showed that. So what do we do with all of that? It's a huge amount of data, and that's where artificial intelligence comes in. So we can use that data just to make sure we have a safe on-time turnaround. It's exciting, but it's I think part of the role of the GOG is to create the framework to be able to embrace that stuff just by having a standard level that everybody's applying globally.
No, I would agree. I think as a ground ops group, I think we need to start setting the expectations for the future. Not just writing procedures and policies for what happens today. It's about making sure we can set out the framework for the future. Yeah. And so that when we do have things like automated vehicles, that we've been part of the development and the procedures and the policies are available. Because there's a lot of people doing an awful lot of good work out there. And let's just make sure we're ahead of the curve, not behind it.
I think the structure, and again, for those that aren't aware, on the ground ops group, there are 10 airlines and 5 from the GSP community, and IATA work as secretariat and subject matter experts. I think the idea that there is a very clear roadmap ahead of what we're trying to achieve in our area, ground operations, rather than, dare I say, previously where you had excellent, well-intended groups of people going and doing pieces of work, getting lots of requests for changes on various aspects, lots of stuff with AHM and all the good stuff that we know and love. I think actually it feels a bit more like, dare I say, a business now, where you actually have a group saying, actually, this is the direction we want to go. Guys, you really need to go away and come back and give us some ideas about how to deliver this. Then people like yourself, Nick, and others in IATA can help then say, okay, well, let's put an end date to this. Let's say we want this by this date, because I think that's historically, I would argue, that's been one of the problems. Yeah. Very little in the way of timeline roadmap, if that's even an expression. And that was an observation I've had in certainly my working life, involved in the industry at an industry level rather than a company and a business level. But again, relatively early days for the ground ops group. During this meeting, we've got a session with our colleagues from the technical groups. Yep. Tomorrow or Wednesday, I can't remember. Tomorrow. So for me, it's all good. I think the challenge for us as a GOG is to help persuade our colleagues in the technical groups that maybe things needed to be a little bit more defined. Rather than being too prescriptive, we can actually say this is really where the industry wants to get to, and we need your help to do that, rather than just say we'll go away for 3 months. I'd actually even like us to look at the number of times these guys meet. If we talk about time, our sector and the airlines that participate. We're all volunteers essentially, right? So we all come to Montreal or Geneva or wherever and spend 2 or 3 days and trying to work on best interests. Joseph always talking about put your industry hat on, and we do that. But I think I would welcome a slightly more urgent take on some of these initiatives. You know, Steve's right. Things will take a long time. Before we get a fully autonomous ramp turnaround at a first world airport, it's going to be a few years. But I'd like to see a little bit more. It's a word we have in Manchester called oomph. Personal sort of view.
So, I mean, none of this is new, right? I mean, that's the thing. The thing about this, and so I mean, and now we're using, which I think is perverse and ironic in a way, that we're using potential regulation as a hammer to get everybody to move on this standardization that we've been talking about. So that's fine. That makes sense. We use whatever lever we can to get the industry to move forward. But do the airlines and airports understand this? Do you think that when you go back to your day job, gents, do your CEOs understand what we're facing here and where the challenges are and what the opportunities could be and whether or not there's an interest to invest? Because above the wing is a classic example. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reason to invest there was customer service, and there was efficiencies to be gained through it for sure. But do the C-suite get this needs to be done?
Yes, I think so. Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think there's an understanding. I think there's also an understanding that it's not straightforward, because it is trying to get a group, and it's a large group of organizations and suppliers together. The concept is really simple. I mean, the concept of standardization is really simple, but it's trying to change people's attitudes when they've had their way of doing things for years, and cultures as well. And I guess take the US culture is different to the UK culture, is different to the Dutch, and you're trying to change cultures as well as procedures. Yeah. But yeah, I think certainly I know my boss, he gets it, he understands it.
I think you have to say, what's not to get here? We're trying to make ourselves safer, and we're trying to make ourselves more efficient, and we're trying to deliver more with less. I think it's pretty difficult to argue against all of those three things that you're trying to achieve. And actually, when you set that out, you see, the benefit to anybody involved in the industry. With so huge amounts of waste in this industry that's spent just with, things getting in the way of each other. And it all impacts back on the customer as well. And the airlines are telling us, we want our customer experience to be seamless. Part of the solution to lack of airport infrastructure is that aircraft spend less time on the ground. So how do you make that faster? Yes. How do you make the turnaround faster? How do you move passengers quicker? That's going to drive us to be much more efficient in what we do and use automation. So the CEOs are sort of see that these are the challenges coming our way, and then if you can give us solutions that are going to make it more efficient and safer, then what's not to get? But we do have to paint that picture really, really clearly so that we're all fighting for the same vision.
Yeah. And I go back to John's point around time. The time it takes us as an industry to deliver stuff is incredibly frustrating. However, and this is not to justify it by any way, shape, or form, but if you look at the change we're trying to make through to adoption of the IGOM, we have to get it approved through the IATA process. So, assuming we get an agreement by September this year to change IOSA, it means we can't get it adopted by IOSA until September 2019, and every airline takes 2 years to get through the IOSA process. So you're talking September 2021 at the earliest, before every airline has gone through an IOSA to be checked out whether they comply with an IGOM. And that's the basics of the IGOM.
Yeah, basic safety critical stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, okay, so with that in mind, is it the IATA process that slows it down? Like, is there? I mean, is there a better way to get this done faster? I mean, because every CEO is going to ask us the same question. I know I'll get asked at the board, why can't you do this faster?
Can you do it more quickly? Absolutely, you could. Why? why would it take 18 months to get something put into an audit checklist?
Yeah.
I mean, goodness me, we should be able to
I
do
think
that. You should be able to do that straight away. And
Something very simple we could do would be to try and align all the different documentation around IATA. So we have the IGOM, ISAGO, the Standard Ground Handling Agreement. They all have different delivery times, and they get renewed every 3 or 4 years, but it's a different 3 or 4 years. And actually, you need the three of those things to connect. If you're going to implement the IGOM, you want your ISAGO to audit the IGOM. So if you change the IGOM, you've got to change ISAGO. Yep. And if you want to then put it into a sort of a commercial terms, that this commercial agreement is based on the IGOM, then you've got to change the Standard Ground Handling Agreement. So if we could align all those things together, at least it would take 3 years and not 5 before it all washes through, all the various different sort of documents that have to connect. So I think there's a few ideas that we've come up with that could simplify things, but we will, to even get to that stage, you've got to get everybody in the IATA world to agree.
Yeah, well, I think that, to me, having been in the industry for most of my life and now being on a trade association side, it's time for us to start listening, which is why for me, I'm encouraged by the strength of the ground operations group itself, because of the people that we have participating in that group, and it is speaking on behalf of industry. And that's not just the airlines, it's also the ground service providers as well, which I think is important, because I think we did lose time over the last, say, 5 to 10 years because of the proliferation of ground service providers versus the airline self-handling. And because of that, there was a bit of a disconnect.
yeah.
And a lot of race to the bottom, as we know, and we haven't even touched on that race to the bottom in terms of turn rates and what we're doing to ourselves by trying to keep that as cheap as possible, because you get what you pay for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it does feel within the, again, looking parochially at the ground ops group, it does feel like we've got a good group of people who are genuinely trying to move the industry forward. There's no personal agendas there. It's how do we take the industry and get ourselves to a better place, which is great news.
I think you made a good point. In the past, it's been very fragmented, the industry on the ground. It's been airports doing ground handling, it's been airlines doing ground handling, it's been independent ground handlers. With the consolidation of ground handlers that's happening, you're now creating big businesses, but big professional businesses that have to have all of those, all of the expertise in place, and therefore they can advise the airlines, I think, a lot more on how to create a safe environment on the ground than in the past. It's been the other way around, where the airlines have been telling the ground handlers, this is what I want, because I don't know whether it's been a lack of trust or fragmentation or whatever it is. But we do have an opportunity now. The reason why passenger has developed so fast is because passengers have demanded it. They tell the airlines they won't fly on them unless they give them a better passenger experience. Unfortunately, bags and cargo don't say the same things. So it's fallen behind. But I think we do have a real opportunity now with these big professional organizations that are driving that industry forward. Yeah.
With that in mind, do you guys think that we're going to see further consolidation in the terms of ground service providers? And the second part of that would be something that we're beginning to see more and more of now because of the cost of labor, and is the push to self-handle, consideration to self-handle again. Do you guys think that that's something that we haven't really given enough thought or attention
Do my
to?
presentation for tomorrow now, aren't you?
Is that what it is? I'm into your presentation
Part of
already.
it. My view is consolidation will continue. I think very, very roughly, I think the 4 or 5 largest global ground handlers are about 15% of the global ground handling market.
50?
15.
15.
1.5.
So I think there's opportunity. Our colleagues from Swissport, there's a big recent acquisition in Australia, New Zealand, Aerocare. Donatra generally have been quite acquisitive. Menzies, of course, I think are well known for, they really acquired ASIC quite recently. So actually, yes, I would suggest there is scope for more consolidation, absolutely. Still a lot of mom and pop operators down in the ground handling world, that, we've talked about that. The one airport site ground handler that Dad started 25 years ago, and I'm taking over now, and I've got 8 customers, and but what we do as an industry affects that organisation, and that's one of my struggles in my role, is trying to persuade somebody that's got 7 turnarounds a day in one airport that actually decisions taken in high-rise buildings in Montreal ultimately will affect you, because most of your customers use IATA SGH8, for example. So yeah, I think there's definitely that. And I've forgotten the second question, but that was a bit meaty.
Self-handling.
Self-handling. Well, that's a very, very interesting question. there is, I think, a well-known challenge, and I'm trying to use opportunity and not doing very well, with staff turnover in lots of parts of the world.
Yeah.
And North America, I think, is particularly well known as a challenge. The self-handling is an interesting one, and I won't say the airline I was talking to quite recently, and it was related to self-handling at hubs. And most airlines a lot of airlines still self-handle at hubs. They wouldn't outsource to a third-party provider. If fuel goes to $125 a barrel, and you're finding you're paying a 20% premium on labor because you're an airline, not a ground handling company, this colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, said, that might change things. There's lots of issues with unions and all those sorts of things. Yeah. But if our industry, and Steve alluded to, some quite big global players with massive investment in IT, SMS, loads and loads of good stuff, if you can get a 20% gain on your employee-related costs by outsourcing, even at a hub, okay, maybe I should have to think about that. And there's always been a differential in my working life between airline staff salaries and ground handling salaries, fact of life. Yeah. Up to 30-40% in some parts of the world.
Well, GSPs are paid more.
Sorry, sorry, I got it. Don't worry about my
like
dad.
a true airline.
Yeah. So I don't know. The only one I'm familiar with recently, I think, was Jet2 in the UK. Decided to move to a self-handling option, but I don't know what was behind that decision. I didn't read about it. So the answer is I don't know about that one. It's an interesting one. Tomorrow I'll put up a slide from which I stole from a large organisation that shows a slightly different take on that in terms of projections. So if I take what they're telling me, I'm not sure there's going to be lots of reversion back to self-handling, particularly, as I said, with some of the uncontrollable costs that affect the airlines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would imagine the economics will drive it, and I guess the fact if you have a supplier providing the service, then you can flex much more easily than you can if you're insourced. And I'm sure, but equally, I'm sure there'll be plenty of occasions out there stations where you'll see established airlines saying, actually, we will insource, perhaps for the reasons that John's described around retention of people, retention of staff. Because, as you say, in North America, it is a challenge, just the sheer turnover of employees.
And we have to make our industry more interesting. Yeah. We have to, I think, try and educate people that there is actually, ground handling. It's okay. It's quite cool to get into ground handling. It's not a bad, career.
Well, I mean, that's a good, because that was one of the questions. Is that, attrition is an issue. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can talk about automation, which could help maybe. Why aren't aircraft self-parking? Why aren't bridges being placed automatically, and all those good things, which will help some of the attrition. But in some locations, that attrition's in the 40, 50. I mean, last year, I think someone said it was 80% in some regions. So,
but the attrition happens in the processing jobs, the baggage handling, in the ramp handling, things like that. Increasingly, with all this technology, we're going to have these sort of more centralized roles that are about coordination and management and trying to make sure that things sort of add up together. We need more intelligence. We need more, more innovation amongst the management team. So, as we move on and the processing roles start to become more automated, then attrition becomes less important. And the other thing is, if you can standardize these, simple, repeatable processes on the ground, then actually attrition matters less, because it's just very quick just to bring somebody new in and take it over for the next season.
Assembly line.
Assembly line type thing. So whilst we do have to, I agree with John, it would be great to make the industry more interesting. If you're a baggage handler, it's pretty difficult to.
But it might be a different type of industry you're joining.
Yeah.
And as you said, your training would be different. It'll be more technical training. It won't just be on your knees in 50 degrees in a 737 bulk loading bags.
But how many people want to join Amazon warehousing? It's something people are really interested in now, because Amazon have completely revolutionized it, and they now have attractive roles in an attractive business. And actually, it's running a warehouse and doing postal service. So, that's the sort of thing that we want to attract the best talent into the industry by actually making it much more appealing and much more innovative. Yeah.
But I do agree with you. I think that sea change comes with the automation.
Yeah.
I think because, again, sort of repeating what we said before, 8 million customers a year, up from 8 billion from 4 billion. We just haven't got enough bodies out there to move those bags or move those aircraft. So there's got to be technology that takes over. Otherwise, the whole thing just doesn't work.
And you were saying, why is passenger advanced? More investment.
Yeah.
It's sexier. It's passenger experience. You know, it's much sexier to invest in a new, biometric check-in system than it is to invest in a baggage reconciliation system.
But as Steve also said, the customer demands it.
Yeah.
So as a customer, how many of us actually want to go and speak to an agent?
Yeah.
Most of us these days are very self-sufficient. Go on your telephone, check in, straight
100%.
straight through to the departure lounge or the exec lounge, wherever you're going.
Yeah, but when we can say that, but then we have baggage tracking that we're still nowhere near where we need to be as an industry, and that's where customers do speak. And
Yes.
as an industry, we're still losing somewhere in the range of 6 to 7 bags per 1,000. Customers are tracking their own bags now, and a business case could be done on a napkin, but we still can't seem to get that to where it needs to be.
What about the RFID debate going on for 20 years? RFID bag tags.
Yeah.
I can't do that. It's 3 cents a tag.
So the investment does get in the way of advancing. So that's where safety and manuals are probably the less sexy but easiest things to do in terms of standardization to get things done, right?
And I guess the danger comes back to bag tagging. If we let Amazon or Google or somebody else provide that service, then they've got our data. They'll end up knowing more about our customers than we do.
Yeah.
And that's not a good place to be.
Google will be tracking our bags and selling seats and doing it all.
Yeah.
So what keeps you up at night? Anything that if you could do one thing between now and the end of the year, and what would that be?
I mean, from a very tactical perspective, I think, and not linking it to my airline specifically, but things that we've talked about at the ground ops group, unsecured loads. So the work we haven't quite cracked that as an industry yet. Now that's not to say that we've got pallets and ULDs hurtling up and down.
So load shifts, you mean?
Not so much a load shift, but locks that don't work, locks that fall down, and nets that aren't done up properly, and just it's. I don't think it's necessarily safety critical, but clearly, if Mr. Boeing put 4 locks in an aircraft because you need 4 locks, and the fact if somebody's only putting 3 up, well, something's failed. But it's just that attention to detail. We see it, and I know colleagues in other airlines see exactly the same thing. So for me, I think that's one area where and one of the actions actually we've asked one of the technical groups to work on is how do we improve the performance on unsecured loads.
Is that a culture?
But technology again is a fix.
Is that a cultural thing? Or pressure for on-time performance? I mean, we've all heard of that.
I don't think it's a pressure. I don't think it's a pressure of on-time performance. I think it's partly a cultural thing because probably people kick locks up with their feet rather than using their hands.
Yeah.
I think it's probably custom and practice because I guess if you're doing 8-10 turns a day for weeks or years on end, you probably become complacent. So it's all the behavioural things that we probably see in other industries. And again, for me, technology. Let's get Airbus and Boeing and the other manufacturers to come up with something which locks a pallet in place without the human. Because going back to the autonomous turnaround, the one bit that will probably be the most difficult based on today's technology is locking those bins in place, because you probably still need a human to do that. We can probably do everything else apart from that last mundane piece.
Well, so I mean, you're in charge of safety. You're running a ground handler. You were a ground handler. I mean, still to this day, the greatest cause of damage on the ramp is failure to follow the standard operating
standards. Yeah.
So, how do you address that?
I'm going to be really boring. Technology. I think what we've seen with the development and the investment in new GSE at Heathrow, with proximity sensors and cutout switches, and just big fat soft bumpers on the front of equipment, proper maintenance on equipment, the amount of damage can be cut down significantly. The next step is take the human away altogether. I am a true believer. That's where we will get to a point where we effectively have no damage. Or if damage does occur, it's going to be bad because the equipment's failed, but it's going to be much less frequent.
Well, you're going to be very popular when you go back home with the labor unions, I'm sure.
But it's where we need to get to.
It's
where we need to get to, Nick.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a very simple hierarchy of safety. The first thing is you eliminate the risk. The second is you engineer your way out of it. And the third thing and the last thing you do is try and educate people to try and manage it.
Absolutely.
Because that's where the failure is going to happen. So we've got to move all of this risk up the chain and either eliminate it or engineer it out.
But that's pretty frustrating, though, because you talk about GSE, because so I put my hat on and back at my old day job, and the answer is already there. The sensors on the equipment
Yeah,
can be implemented in no time.
cost.
A mandate for the industry to say by 2019, not one piece of GSE gets created unless it has it.
Yep.
So what's stopping us?
But equally, and that's a good example of the time, the whole time that takes. Because that decision was made back in about, what, 2015, 2016, for an end date of 2019. I think it's happening. I do believe it's happening. Clearly there's opportunities for those airlines or those GSPs who buy reconditioned equipment. But if you're buying new equipment, it's there.
Well, a
It's
manufacturer will
available.
do it. I mean, you're not going to
Yeah,
get you
absolutely.
can't get a car now that doesn't have a nav on it. You
Yeah.
can't, these things become standards.
Yep.
And we seem to be missing that opportunity
Yeah,
somehow.
I think the GSE manufacturers are now, most GSE now has the anti-collision
Yeah.
software on it, and so we don't buy anything without it anymore. It's the problem is the retrofitting. It's still very expensive to retrofit. It's there's some technology issues with it. It doesn't, if you're going to have it, it has to work. Otherwise, you'll end up with more incidents because people rely on something that doesn't work properly.
Yeah.
And that's with the retrofitting. That's where we're still having challenges. But certainly the new equipment.
like lane assist in a car makes you lazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's to your point. I mean, the 380 with TCAS, flight crew, just take your hands off. The aircraft will do it for you.
Yeah.
And these are guys and girls that we train and spend a lot of money in, but we say just don't touch the controls. The aircraft will do it much better than you can. And that's exactly the approach we should be taking on the ground.
Do you think that we're heading in the right direction with a solid, strong ground operations group? Do you feel that confidence will come that they will be strong enough to mandate some of these things and have IATA take it to the board for approval? Do you think that we can get there? Because I think that's part of the missing piece, being able to bring something forward to say we want this as an industry and let the board say no.
I think for me, the as a ground ops group making those decisions, absolutely. I don't see any challenges there. I think when you look at the people who are sitting around there, I think we've all got a similar view of what the future should look like. I would have probably no doubt that the Board of Governors would be fairly supportive because everybody benefits.
Yep.
The most expensive asset we've got in the aircraft is going to be able to be utilised better and more frequently. So that's got to be a good thing. The challenge, I think, goes back to time. And how do we get an industry to move at the same pace? And again, my brain isn't big enough to work out all the different permutations, but I see IOSA as the right mechanism for us. Because us asking Steve to do something as a ground handler, he goes, yeah, that's great. Are we going to pay for it?
Who's paying for it?
Probably not. So let's flip the thing around. Let's put the onus on the airlines to make the changes and make these guys' lives much easier.
Yeah.
And that's the approach I think we've got to take. So back to the Board of Governors piece, if we've got to take stuff to BOG, we've got to be prepared to put it into IOSA, because that's really the only stick that IATA have to make sure the airlines drive the change through their
Through
organizations.
IOSA.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there isn't really any other mechanism available today.
Okay, we've only got just over 10 minutes left, and the app is down. So, Stephen, your prediction was correct. So I don't know if there's an opportunity to ask in the room if there's any questions. These lights are blinding, by the way. We got hands over there.
I'm Air Commodore Zafar, Executive Director, Shaheen Airport Services, Pakistan. My question is, during the course, when you were talking about the future development of ground handlers, in terms of when we keep in mind and we envisage the low-cost, low-budget airlines coming in, because they would like to spend minimum time on ground, and maybe they compromise on certain requirements which are mandatory, may not match the international standards of safety and security on ground as well as in the air. While we look at these airlines, and we being the ground handler, how do you match? What is the time frame that you may suggest? Because these days, these airlines, they ask for 45 minutes on ground, and maybe earlier they want to just have the passengers offloaded, load, and go away. But this thing, I'm an aviator. I personally feel that this is dangerous. While we look up to very nice resolve and solutions for improvement and development, this aspect is always neglected. Please.
Who wants to take that on?
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is you're getting a lot of pressure from the airlines to do fast turnarounds, and that's compromising safety.
Of course, they're asking to give them turnaround less than 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Low budget, low cost, lesser the time on ground, and of course, sometimes they'll say, okay, do soft cleaning. Sometimes they'll compromise on hot weather. Maybe instead of two AC vans, they may compromise with one. Sure. Passenger satisfaction service, that is compromised. Other than that, they are doing as far as compromising on time.
In my experience, generally a customer airline, when you're having your discussions about handling them or not, will come up with what's still called, I think, a minimum turnaround time.
Yeah.
So your minimum turnaround time should be the minimum time with which you mutually agree with your customer airline what is a safe time to enable you to offload passengers and dead load and then reload and stuff like that. Clearly, when things go off schedule, all of those of us, as an airline station manager many years ago, you come in late, you want to turn around as quickly as possible, and there's a lot of pressure to try and make up time. And it sounds to me like you're actually got airlines that want to schedule times which are very difficult to achieve in terms of turnaround. And I think that's a conversation you need to have with your customer and try and get them to help you understand how you can deliver a turnaround in, whatever it is. I mean, I travel on WestJet in Canada. I think they have a 20-minute transit, right, for a 737. It appears to work. It appears to be safe. Yeah. You may have different environmental conditions at your airports. I don't know what challenges you've got not to achieve what your customer wants. But ultimately, it's a grown-up conversation, isn't it, between yourself, your customer airline, and say, these are the challenges I've got. I cannot deliver a 30-minute turnaround on a 777. I don't know the detail. And you have a grown-up conversation about that. Most airlines in my working life, very, very, very few have been unreasonable people that I've dealt with. David Anderson at British Airways is probably the exception. Yeah. So I don't know if that's a viable option for you. I really don't know. Do these guys have minimum ground times they give you or not? You agree as a ground handler?
Mostly the budget airline or the low-cost airline, they fly narrow body.
Right.
And 777 takes minimum time for 777 to turn around is 1 hour at least. You dealing with 380 passengers plus. These airlines. My question is that do we determine certain time for these low-budget, low-cost airlines vis-a-vis with the have consent of the ground handlers? That what is the minimum time required on ground for the aircraft to be, pushed back within that stipulated time? If that safe time has to be given, there are airports where, maybe the distance between where the aircraft is standing and when finally the passenger is checked out, there's a lot of distance and time that consume time.
You have to demonstrate, sir, you have to demonstrate that it's not possible to deliver what you're being asked to do contractually. That's your only solution. You have to explain, demonstrate that I cannot do this in this time because of my airport environment, the distances, and again, most airlines will turn around, and they may turn around and say, well, that's our corporate standard, right? They may say 20-minute turnaround. And you can say, well, at our airport, I'm afraid we can't do that. And again, that goes back to the grown-up conversation between yourself and your customer airline. I don't know another solution. Otherwise, every flight leaves late.
And you're never going to have a standard. You're never going to have a standard MTA per aircraft type that goes across the industry. It's just not going to happen. Schedules aren't built that way.
Haven't really helped, have we?
Thank you, sir. I see a hand there in the back. Bob?
Bob's happy because we talked about
he's going
unsecured load.
he's going to throw us all under the bus for safety. Just watch.
No, he's not.
Oh, okay. All right.
My name is Bob Rogers. Some of you may have seen me jump out of a container 2 years ago at this event in Toronto. I'm the ULD guy. A lot of talk today about technology and automation and so on. But I've got one question for this group. Right now, right now, Boeing and Airbus are building airplanes set up for bulk loading. Those airplanes will still be flying in 40 years' time. That means you'll still be bulk loading. This industry will still be doing bulk loading in 40 years' time. Is this something you really want to happen? Or isn't this something that IATA should be trying to explain to their member airlines that actually this is short-sighted? I know they're cheaper, I know they're lighter, there's all the arguments, but to me, it just doesn't make sense that we're perpetuating a practice that started 40 years ago and will continue in 40 years' time. What other industry would stick like this?
Save
Thank
a lot
you.
of backs, I guess.
I think that's a really interesting observation. I guess of something which might put your mind at rest slightly, and it would only just be ever so slightly, is that there are people from Boeing and Airbus who sit on the various IATA groups. Now that doesn't necessarily translate into moving away from bulk loaded aircraft. I mean that's quite a jump. But you're right. Your comments are absolutely spot on. If you look back at what happened back in the 60s with ULDs, really the world hasn't changed a great deal, let alone the bulk loaded aircraft. I think people are aware of it. How you make that flip is quite a challenge, and it needs quite a bit of thinking. But your point is well made.
Any other? Everybody's starving to death.
Hungry.
Okay. Well, I think nothing wrong with putting 4 minutes back into everybody's schedule. So with that, gentlemen, it's a pleasure. David, pleasure may be stretched, but it's always great to see you.
Within reason.
But I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I know you could have been sitting out there just listening as opposed to participating, and we really do appreciate the fact that you took your time and open and honest and great feedback, and thanks very much for that. So John, over to you.
Thank you.